Welcome to Biztech C-Suite Conversations Show, the show where we feature companies operating globally, talking about their solutions and how they make a difference to their customers' businesses. Now, today we speak to Dev Dhiman. He's the Managing Director, Asia Pacific at GBG. Now, GBG are global specialists in identity data intelligence and were founded in the UK in 1989 and are listed on the London Stock Exchange. Now, Dev, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Dev, for a start, give us an overview of your company and its history.
Sure. So as you said, we're listed on the London Stock Exchange. We came out of a tiny town in the UK called Chester, and we've now grown into a business that 30 years later is truly global, truly international, not just here in Asia Pacific, which is the region that I look after, but also in the US and around Europe. And actually, we've got huge ambitions in terms of accelerating that growth further, be that through organic expansion. So we've just now entered Thailand with physical feet on the ground. We've operated in that market before, but now we actually have employees there, or through M&A. Just last year in December, we made our biggest ever acquisition, which was a company called Accurant, which is based in the US, but again, was another global company. So huge ambitions, a truly global company, 1,500 employees around the world and growing really fast and operating, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a very exciting space.
Okay, you just opened in Thailand. Give us an overview of your footprint in the Asia Pacific region and what are your key segments that you focus on in the region? Sure.
So as I said, we've also been in Asia for a number of years, so well over 20 years through acquisitions that we've operated in Asia Pacific. Our biggest business in the region is actually in Australia, where we have offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra. But of late, we've actually seen phenomenal growth in our Asia business, where we have locations in China, Malaysia, Indonesia, as we talked about, Thailand, soon to be Vietnam, soon to be Philippines, and where I'm based currently in Singapore. In the region, we operate a number of different types of business. So in Australia, we deliver a identity verification service. So if you're opening a new crypto account, for example, in Australia, the chances are that GBG is empowering your check to make sure you are who you say you are. In Malaysia, we actually operate a list of, or a blacklist of known fraudsters. So again, banks can cooperate and collaborate to understand, has this actor, as we call them, been seen before and defrauded another one of their cohort. And as we talked about in many of the other markets in Asia, we operate an application fraud detection solution and a transaction monitoring detection solution, which is all really geared around stopping the fraudsters in their tracks and keeping our consumers safe for our customers.
And so essentially your business is about trust, isn't it? And it's built around three key areas, so location, identity, and fraud. Now,
That's right.
Who are your key customers in terms of regional customers that you've just mentioned?
So we are fortunate, Brian, to enjoy great customer relationships that go from multinational banks, such as HSBC or Citi, down to regional banks in the ASEAN market, such as DBS and UOB, down to some of the big four in Australia, such as NAB and CBA. In addition to that, we also serve a number of adjacent markets, as I said, around healthcare, superannuation in Australia. Crypto is a really great business for us around the region, given the strength of that product line. And also buy now, pay later, which is an emerging theme. And I'm sure we will see a lot more growth in this part of the world, in Asia, through some of the digital banking activity that's happening at the moment as well.
So Dev, essentially, you're really in a sweet spot. You're in this hyper growth industry. And especially given the fact that if we take a macro view of the Asia Pacific region, there is tremendous migration of customers and consumers online. So I think in 2021 alone, there was like 40 million new internet users that came in to Southeast Asia in that year alone. What does that mean then for banks and financial institutions?
Yeah.
Because you've got everyone moving online.
Yeah. So I think, look, you said a really interesting point, which is the GBG business really is about trust. It's about helping our customers, the FIs and the other institutions, trust their consumers, knowing that they are who they say they are and they're not a bad actor. As you said, there's two big trends that I would like to call out around, you said, I think you called it online migration. So yes, folks like you and I are showing a real preference for doing our business with our FIs or our taxi app or whatever you want to call it. We want to do that online for sure. We want convenience, but we also really want privacy, and we want to make sure that we maintain the trust with the end institution. So there's folks like us who I guess would be the traditional consumers who are now moving online. So our expectations are shifting away from the old days where you went into a branch and you got sat down and you talked through things with your financial planner, etc., to now wanting everything online. So that's trend number one. The second trend, which is actually even more exciting, and actually what gets me out of bed and why I love what I do, is we are seeing people go online for the first time. So there's people like you and I who are moving online, but there is the big swathes of our population, especially in ASEAN, who up to now has been financially excluded because they couldn't get access to the financial service because it was either too difficult to access or not practical. If you look at the archipelago of Indonesia, where there's 13,000 branches across it, but probably not one that's close to where you are, or you're still under coverage of 2G, whilst the bank services online were made for 5G. Well, those consumers are now also making their first steps into the formal financial ecosystem. And so that brings a real big challenge to banks. So, people like you and I, who probably have a credit history and can be verified and validated. We probably have a driving license if you're lucky enough to drive in our region. Contrast that with others who have absolutely no footprint, no digital footprint, no physical history that they actually exist. And so if you're a bank today and clearly you're going after that huge marketplace of the emerging middle class, let's say, you are seeing huge challenges of how to do that, be that technology, be that assessing the worthiness of that individual, be that very practically for us, assessing whether that person is really Brian, right? So making sure that it's the person you say you are. Because the reason that's important is because for banks, that newly created marketplace is hugely exciting and interesting, but it's also hugely exciting, lucrative, and interesting to fraudsters. So, banks are seeing that huge insurge of online demand, and it's not without challenge as to how they service it effectively.
And so, Dev, this brings a very interesting question, because yes, technology has enabled democratization of finance. So you have large swathes, as you've just mentioned, unbanked and underbanked populations, places like Indonesia, as you mentioned, Philippines, embracing digital banking. But as you also mentioned, the bad actors are eyeing this lucrative pie. How has the frequency and severity of financial crimes and fraud changed over the last 2 or 3 years in particular?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the short answer is it's got way more frequent. It's got way more. The velocity has increased significantly, and when we talk about this, I think it's really important to take a step back for a second. The people we're talking about, the fraudsters, they aren't a 16-year-old in a dingy basement coding away, hacking away. These are hugely sophisticated multinational businesses. And I use the word businesses for a reason. These guys don't evaluate themselves in terms of a quick buck. They talk about revenue, they talk about OPEX, they talk about profit, just like other businesses do, because the sums of money these guys are pulling in is significant. And actually the proceeds and where those go are not to good places, right? I'm sure everybody listening to this is aware of that also. So firstly, let's just talk about, this is a big problem in terms of the severity and the consequence of where it goes. So in terms of your question around how frequently this is happening, I mean, to tell you a story personal to me, just 2 months ago, my mum called me one morning and said, hey, I got your messages last night. I'll send you the money. And I said, Mum, what is going on here?
Oh, gosh.
And, it must have been 4 a.m. in Singapore. And she received messages from me asking her to transfer me some money. And thankfully, she paused, and my dad said, don't do it. He's obviously asleep. But you can see this touches all of us, right? All of us will have our own personal story about this. And the reason I share that really is this happens a lot, and it's happening a lot more. You will have seen on the news in Singapore and around the region, it's not just unique to Singapore, clearly. We're seeing any kind of business opportunity. I'll give you a really good example. Australia, for example, announces changes to superannuation rules. Immediately, we see as a business intensified activity of fraudsters perpetrating to be financial advisors. So as soon as a little, offshoot of a business opportunity shoots up, these guys run to it. And recently, we saw in Singapore this issue around OTP. And when you see that vulnerability, you see a lot more activity in that vulnerability because these fraudsters are telling their friends. They're saying, "Hey, do you know if you do this in this market with this person, you can probably have a good chance of winning big." And so that's why we see these things build pace very, very quickly.
Okay, so if I'm a CIO of a financial services institution, what sort of technology am I deploying to fight these bad actors?
So I think that the key really is, as much as we want to say there can be a world without fraud or financial crime, the reality is there won't be, because these guys really want your money. And they are going to innovate, again, to use a very traditional business phrase, they are going to innovate at a very rapid pace. So for the CIO, really, it's about making sure that before new products are launched, so we talked earlier about the huge now demand for online channels, make sure you've thought through all the vulnerabilities that will be there. And so getting that product out a day or two or month later, yes, your business heads are going to say, we need it fast, we need it fast. But actually, as you said, we're in the business of trust. And you only get one chance in many economies to lose that trust with your consumer. So as you said, it's about looking at the estate in totality, making sure that there are no vulnerabilities, having a real good process to identify vulnerabilities. Where you fail, acknowledge you failed and address it instead of having a process that simply papers over cracks. So it's not easy by any stretch. And then the last thing I would say for everybody out there is really collaborating as an industry. We talk about fraudsters collaborating, sharing notes, giving each other's tips. I think it's really important that we do the same and we wherever we can, because a fraudster does not have a favorite brand. Yeah, he is brand agnostic. He doesn't care if you're bank A or bank B. And so you guys in that industry should be really working to collaborate and share intelligence around where the vulnerabilities exist.
And a lot of times in terms of technology, the panacea which everyone seems to think about is artificial intelligence and financial crime management. But the reality is these are not foolproof solutions. So what are the pitfalls and what are the things that banks and financial institutions should consider when rolling out these artificial intelligence solutions to fight against the bad actors?
I think artificial intelligence sometimes gets more credit than it deserves. So what you don't do is find this bot, stick it on your premise, and suddenly it just fixes everything, right? It's not that, right? So you have to still feed, just as you feed the human brain with data, the AI brain needs to be fed with data. And so the key for us as a business and what we talk about with our customers is making sure that you have the most diverse set of data that you can possibly achieve, be that internally. So we go back to the CIO, the role of the CIO, break down silos in the business, share as much data within your business, or externally. We work with companies like Seon, who have really great data that can hugely enrich some of the solutions we provide. So technically we provide more of a technology platform, but what we have seen as our business model of late is actually plugging in data assets that we share, either our own proprietary data, you talked about some of our location data, our identity data, or working closely with partners, because again, we see the way to win is collaboration. So getting as much data into the ecosystem as possible, and then let that really powerful AI engine go to work.
Okay, Dev, one of the key things around all of this is it's not just the technology that makes this happen, it's around people. People make these happen. Talent make this happen. But you're in Singapore, there's a war for talent, especially in this space. How has the talent crunch impacted organizations and how can they navigate around this?
Yeah, and we are not immune to that, right? I mean, we work in, as you said, a very hot industry right now, and the war for talent, I've never seen it to the level it's at now. And you can see things like the gig economy, where effectively people are sharing headcount now because they can't fully get it on board themselves. So we're seeing a huge war for talent, but as you said, human beings are key to a lot of, we talk about AI and we talk about machine learning, but really human beings are still the center of the world, fortunately for us all. One of the things that we're seeing as our business to help offset that, so we have customers, for example, in the Philippines, or we have customers in Vietnam, where some of the talent is not as well groomed or developed as it would be, say, in North America or Europe. So again, I will sound like a broken record in a way, but just trying to get those industries to collaborate more so that we share our resources. What do I mean by that? Well, having platforms like ours that has data from our different customers, which we're able to anonymously share back to say, this could be a fraudster. He or she went to bank A last week, they're now coming to you, watch out. And so by doing more of that, I think you also play a little bit to offsetting the challenge around talent, because you are not outsourcing, that's not the right word, but you are, you're leveraging skill sets that exist in the ecosystem.
Okay, so you touched on outsourcing, and I want to bring up a very interesting trend over the last 20 years. So if you think back, Dev, and we're both old enough, 20 years ago, regulators in particular were obsessively against outsourcing in banking and financial institutions in particular, because of all the perceived risk associated with outsourcing. That has obviously evolved, particularly in the event of cloud, and regulators in this region in particular have been quite open in terms of embracing new technologies. Could you share some insights into how banks and financial institutions in the APAC region have been embracing the cloud, and then basically taking advantage of all the benefits of outsourcing without some of the risks?
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point in terms of, outsourcing can have various levels. So you could, talk of cloud, that is outsourcing. Would anybody in this day and age really call that outsourcing? No, they would just say it's good business sense. And so I think there is, as ever, like we talked about earlier, where an institution launches a new service, there is vulnerabilities associated with that. If you outsource part of your risk mitigation strategy, there will be vulnerabilities associated with that, because you are opening a door. Every time you open a door, somebody could walk through it. And so I think the role of the CIO is to be cognizant, again, of those risks and make sure there are really strong remediations in place, not just technology, but the practices, behaviors, training, etc., for the teams. But where we've seen cloud really come into its own, and we ourselves are taking our fraud, financial crime and fraud detection estate to the cloud, is where it can really capitalize on the processing power and the computing power. So traditionally, when you're working on premise, there is a real limit, unless you want to spend millions with server technology. There is a real limit to how many transactions can you process. Now, in a world where very few services were online and lots of customers were excluded from the financial ecosystem, you could kind of get away with that. You could get away with a slow processing time. You have a cup of coffee while you're in the branch, while you wait for the decision. But today you want it now, right? You want everything instant. And so the banks are not only having to do things quicker, because you and I can't wait. Every time, I know I'm terrible at it, you refresh when something's not loaded in 4 seconds. Not only that, you're also seeing more applications and you're putting more services online. So you're seeing a multiplier effect here. And where cloud has really helped is being able to continually monitor when it comes to transaction monitoring, which is probably the highest prevalence of speed required. They're able to monitor more customers, more transactions, and obviously all of that is the intent of keeping the fraudsters safely out of their ecosystem.
Now, Dev, it's 2022. Tell us about Financial Crimes 4.0 and what critical elements that banks and financial institutions need to prioritize this year to stay ahead of bad actors.
Yeah, so Financial Crimes 4.0, as you call it, or Financial Crime 4.0, is something that we kind of came up with here at GBG, which really tells the story of how fast financial crime is evolving. So Financial Crime 1.0 was somebody going into a shop and doing a forged check or forged application. You're coming now to 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. So now we're at 4.0, and it's a hugely more sophisticated play that we're seeing in the market. So if you take, for example, we 3.0, lots of bots, lots of copy and pasting to make thousands of applications in a second. Well, what happens? guys like us figure out, well, if someone's copying and pasting every field, it's probably not a human being. When you or I create an application, we don't copy and paste our name, we don't copy and paste our address. So that's probably a bot. So let's stop that transaction. So what do the fraudsters do? They think, aha, I've got an idea. If we need the application to look like it's done by a human, let's get a human. So let's create what they call human farms, which is, thousands of people in a facility that you or I would call an office, just processing applications with fraudulent data that they've acquired through the dark web. So that's the pace at which some of this stuff is moving. And the reason why, as we talked about earlier, the prize is just so great. And so, it is, I don't want to alarm people, but there is a real dark side to some of what we're seeing here in the market.
And Dev, now coming back to GBG, what are your plans in the Asia Pacific for 2022? We've just about finished Q1. What are the plans for the rest of the year?
So it really is about a couple of things. So continuing to give best-in-class service to our existing customers. We talked about how quickly the market's evolving. So we need to make sure that they are ahead of some of the scams and things that we're seeing and sharing that back with them. I do think this is a year where we're going to see a lot more social engineering scams. What do I mean by social engineering scams? Well, it's a job advert that's posted that is bogus. You as and unfortunately for you and I, typically it's men that fall for these scams, and it's typically younger men who have just come out of university or schooling. So please keep an eye out if you fall into that category. But we see these job ads get posted. We see people really eager to get their first step on the way, and they apply and they share way too much information. So I think we're going to see more social engineering scams, and we see more than just obviously the job advert. That's just one example. So for us, it's about making sure that our customers are seeing that, and also just sharing, because as I said, what happens in one market normally spreads into another market. So making sure that we're sharing best practice across the region. But as I talked about, it's all about investment as well. So we really want to continue to invest behind the opportunity we have here. We saw a great financial year for us last year that just is now closing as we speak. A financial year ahead of us that we feel really excited about. We've got some great opportunities, and we're working on some new developments from a product standpoint that we think our customers will really enjoy. Now,
it's been a fascinating conversation, Dev, but before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I think what I always say, Brian, when I'm asked this sort of question is, we talk about some very complex things when we talk about financial crime, and we talk about, digital migrations and things like that. The reality is, as a business, you're trying to do business with another consumer, and we're all consumers. So we know the expectations we have. You want good, quick service, you want privacy, and you want a level of trust between you and that institution that will help keep bringing you back for more business. So for those who are in the fortunate position to run some of the enterprises that we talk about here, making sure that you keep that trust paramount with your consumer, and you do everything you can to keep their data safe, and you also enable innovation to give them the services they want at the click of a finger. So no small challenge, clearly, but we have in this region a lot of exciting things happening across everything we look at, not just at GBG, and so it's on us to make it happen.
Now, Dev, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thanks, Brian, for having me. It was great to be here, and hopefully you'll have me back again someday. Cheers.
We certainly will. We've been speaking to Dev Dhiman, the Managing Director, Asia Pacific at GBG, on Biztech C-Suite Conversations Show. This video and podcast will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.